world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, May 30th, as I am recording this. Now, getting to this a lot later in the day than I anticipated. Now, I talked the other day about how my schedule was going to be getting better, and it is after today. Hopefully, things are going to be changing a little bit for me. I don't know if this new schedule is going to be permanent, but if it is, it will change my days a little bit. And it's amazing how different just moving your work schedule around by a couple of hours each direction can actually matter. Instead of, going in at 2 p.m., if you're going in at 10 or 11 a.m., you get off earlier. It's easier to get things done the rest of the night. And a lot of times at night, like I get my stories done for that day, and I don't want to start off with yesterday's stories by recording a bunch for the following day. So it's going to change how I record. No, I don't know if this is going to be permanent, but hopefully it makes things a little better, and hopefully I can get back around to where I am recording a podcast for you the night before and getting it posted in the early morning hours. And that should hopefully help, so that way there's always a podcast up for you. And of course, going to be continuing to do the lives. I had intended to get a live done as Sunday's podcast. And because I knew I was going to have a short turnaround with everything I had going on Sunday, I just wasn't going to have a lot of time to get a podcast done. I knew I'd be lucky to even get TikToks done, and I didn't even get to that. But I ended up not getting a live done in advance and just did not have the time for a podcast on Sunday. So that explains where Sundays is. And now we are dealing with Monday, and still didn't get a lot of time today because of work and it just all catching up. I'm going to be able to get this podcast done. I didn't get any TikToks done, but hopefully we'll have more for tomorrow. Now, there's always stuff to talk about because with this administration, the news cycle never stops. And it continues to blow my mind about just what is going on when it comes to all of it, right? I mean, every day it is some new level of criminality. And this administration, I believe, is worried about what is going to happen when Donnie's gone. Now, Donald Trump is making more claims. He's talking more about dying. He was making comments about getting to heaven again. And I think that's because he knows, or at least maybe subconsciously, because we know Donald Trump with his personality, he doesn't think toward the future about him being gone, right? In Donald Trump's mind, he is, and this is going to be a reference for some of you out there, in his mind, he is every bit like Connor McLeod or Duncan McLeod, if you're familiar with the Highlander series, that he's going to live forever. Donald Trump thinks himself immortal. He believes when he talks about how he is as mentally fit as he was 20 years ago, or even as a 20-year-old, he genuinely believes it. But the truth of the matter is he's not. Now, I went over this the other day, and I'm going to go over it again real quick before I get into the news stories. He talks about taking these cognitive tests, and he himself keeps bringing it up. And I found a different version of the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Now, they're all different, but they're essentially the same. But I'm going to go over this assessment here. And well, I don't have necessarily the ability. Let's see if I can make this work for those of you watching the video version as I narrated here. Let's see if this works. That's not working. I was going to try to show you the screen, but it's not going to work. So the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. The first is the visual, spatial, or the executive thing, and you get points. Basically, you have to draw a line from 1 to A to 2, and it shows you those two to get you started. And then you are supposed to finish the pattern, and it only goes to E and to 5. So, do you get the pattern? Pretty simple. Most children, once they know their numbers and their alphabet, would probably be able to figure it out. Then this one has a very simple stick figure of a bed. It is 4 simple lines for a bed, the rectangle of a frame, and the rectangle for a headboard. And I guarantee you they are not entirely looking for how perfectly straight you draw them, because you're not given like a ruler or anything. You're supposed to freehand it. But the idea is how close do you get, right? Like, do you get, even if your rectangles aren't perfect and it's close, right? Do you get the legs in the right spot? Does your headboard look like it's in the right spot? Or are you putting the legs in the middle? Are you making a chair? Does it look close? And you get points for that. The last one on that line is the drawing a clock face, an analog clock face. Now, I know some of the younger generation may have problems with drawing an analog clock face, just because it's not something that is as prevalent. A lot of times anymore, all clocks are digital. And that one may be something that ultimately gets changed and they replace it with something else. But you draw a clock face and you get points for the shape of the clock. Do you get the numbers in the right spots, roughly? And do you roughly get the hands in the right spots? And you get a point for each. Then this one has a picture of a horse, a tiger, and a goose. Or maybe it's a duck. It's a duck. But anyway, do you say horse, tiger, duck? And you get 1 point for each. Do you name them right? Now, this one has 5 words. Okay? You need to read the list of words. And can you repeat them? Leg, cotton, school, tomato, and white. And then the person would respond, leg, cotton, school, tomato, and white. Yes, I cheated, but I wanted to make sure I repeated them correctly. And then you do 2 trials. First trial is successful, then you do a recall after 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, you come back and you try to do it again. And then read this list of letters. Subject must tap his hands at each letter A. No points if greater than 2 errors. Now, this list goes F, B, A, C, M, N, A, J, K, L, B, A, F, A, K, D, E, A, J, A, M, O, F, A, and B. And you'd have to tap your hand every time you get the letter right. And then there is a list of digits, okay? They would be read the list 2, 4, 8, 1, 5. And then you would have to repeat them 2, 4, 8, 1, and 5. And then there is 3 more digits, and you have to repeat them backwards. 7, or it's actually 4, 2, 7, and then you would say 7, 2, 4. And then there is 2 sentences where it says repeat these sentences. The child walked his dog in the park after midnight. And then you need to repeat it. The child walked his dog in the park after midnight. And then the artist finished his painting in the right moment or at the right moment for the exhibition. And then you repeat it. Language fluency. Name the maximum number of words in 1 minute that you can think of that begin with the letter B. And you get, there's an upper score of 11. So the goal is to get to at least 11 words. And you need to have more than or at least 11 for fluency. And then there are similarities between banana and orange. You'd come up with fruit. There is hammer and screwdriver. And maybe you come up with tools. And then matches and lamp, and maybe you come up with light source. And then it goes back. It asks you about your recall on those 5 words: leg, cotton, school, tomato, and white. And you get them without assistance? Do you need category clues to get there, or do you have to be given multiple choice? And then they ask you for the day, the month, the year, the day of the week, the place you are at, and the city. So if you're taking it at a hospital, or if you're at the nursing home, or maybe you're at your own house, if you're taking it because of some reason and they give it to you while they're doing care at your house, and you say, well, I'm at home, or where do you think you are anyway, and then what city you are in. Now some of them have in there, oh, I missed it, up under the attention plan, it is start at 60 and subtract by 7. And how many do you get right? And Donald Trump talks about that part and says it contains complex mathematical equations. And that the questions at the end are so very difficult, nobody could get them right. They're so difficult. He doesn't know that we know what he is taking. He doesn't know that this is relatively common knowledge. Now, to him, these probably are difficult questions. Some days he probably doesn't know the day of the week. Maybe he doesn't always know exactly where he's at. Can he remember the 5 words? Don't know. But he talks about this, and the fact that he brings it up every now and then is just a reminder that his health is not good and it is not going to get any better. There is going to come a day when we get to that point, and you find out that Donald Trump is no more, right? It's going to happen. There is going to come a point when Donald Trump is just gone. And what this administration, I think, is planning to do, and I know this is going to sound like a serious allegation, and on some levels, yes, it is I think they are planning for when Donald Trump is gone. They are privately hoping that it does not happen in a way that is very public, right? They don't want him to have some kind of an aneurysm or a stroke or a heart attack or something on stage where it's very public, very visible, and they can't deny it. They want it to be something that happens in private, where they can control the narrative, where they can make it seem like he didn't have it happen to him, that he is fine, and that everything is awesome, right? And they will milk it for a couple of days. Now, they're not going to be able to milk it for very long, because if he goes too long without a public appearance, or if they try to use AI to make his public appearances too often, especially if he is doing briefings without the press there and he's just doing pre-recorded things, AI is not going to get Donald Trump right, because they're not going to get the slurring that we're hearing. He has a lot of saliva in his talk and his speech now, because as other experts that are professionals in the medical field are, they're talking about it. They're saying that he's having trouble swallowing, and that excess saliva is potentially a problem. So they're hoping that he doesn't go down publicly. And I think what they are planning to do, and this should terrify people, is for as much as they complain about Joe Biden and the auto pen, is that they're planning to use the auto pen to recreate Donald Trump's signature on a bunch of things like pardons, maybe a couple of executive orders, even though normally there would be big ceremonies and Oval Office signings of the executive orders. Um, the whole thing, I think they are going to try to use the auto pen to get some last things done that they can put through on Donald Trump's name, and that they can do it that way so that JD Vance doesn't take the heat. Now, one of the reasons I came up with that thought is because it would make sense. And I had a similar thought about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Not that they would use the auto pen, but this actually, I've been thinking a lot about my TikTok videos and how my content's not getting pushed out to anybody. I'm lucky to get over 300 views ever on a TikTok video. Um, it's part of why I've been considering maybe dropping TikTok entirely and just going to YouTube, but I'm not entirely sure about that. I haven't decided because I do have 11,000 followers on TikTok. And a lot of people, and I've made some friends over there who like my content. So if I can reach more people, um, I want to do that. But my biggest TikTok video ever came during the 2024 election campaign. And I talked about it was a late night thought, and it was a hope filled thought. For a lot of you who have found me later on, you see a lot of doom and gloom where I'm talking about all of the bullshit that happens with this administration. But I do talk about positive things, and I've seen positive things as potential. Um, and what I saw was a possibility for things like expanding the Supreme Court and maybe some other things that would have been like taxing the rich, right? Tax increases and things like that, that would be widely unpopular for Kamala Harris. And I said, well, if we do things right, and if we would have given Kamala Harris a win in November with a favorable Congress, there would have been a 17-day window where, with the new Congress being Democratic completely, and a Democrat, and still a Democratic president, but an outgoing Democratic president who's got nothing left, and who could actually take the political heat, right? And he could have signed the laws into place, maybe expanding the Supreme Court, taxing the rich, all of those kind of things, where Kamala Harris would have gotten the uh, benefit from it, but he would have taken the blame because whenever you raise taxes, it doesn't matter who you raise the taxes on. You could raise the taxes on the top 1%, and people are going to be mad at you, right? And part of it is the MAGA base. And it's not just the MAGA base, but a lot of Republicans. But the MAGA base is a good example of what I'm getting at. And that's because they hear you're raising taxes and they don't hear anything else. Oh, my taxes are going to go up. And when you try to explain it to them that it's only going to be on people making more than $10,000 or $10 million a year, rather, or something like that, or 100 million or a billion or whatever number that's up there that is going to be more money than these people will see in their lifetime, that uh, they go, well, I'm going to be making that kind of money one day. A lot of them believe, and that's why they latched on to Donald Trump. He talks about getting a small loan from his father. Well, his small loan was like a billion or $1 million or $5 million, something like that. In the was it the 60s, early 70s? I think it was the late 60s. He got a loan from his father for like $5 million and got his start, and got repeatedly bailed out by his father over the years. Um, but he says, "Well, I got a small loan." And what MAGA, when they hear that, they think small loan like, "Oh, I went down to my local bank and I got a $500, maybe $1,000 loan." That's a small loan relatively, and you know he started his business empire, and now he is supposedly, and I say supposedly because there are questions about Donald Trump's actual worth, especially when you figure in how much of his stuff has been mortgaged, how much of it is leveraged, how many properties is he upside down on, uh, because he constantly robs Peter to pay Paul. And but they think that, well, if he did it, I could do it. All it takes is the right amount of work, and that's a problem, right? That's the thing with Donald Trump. So I was saying back then that Joe Biden could have signed off on raising the taxes and made it better and letting Kamala Harris get the benefits of all of it. And that's what I think they're going to want to try to do to some extent in the last days before uh, Donald Trump goes down, right? That it's going to be a situation where with Donald Trump that they end up uh, having to go with it, and when he's gone, that they would have to sign, that they may try to put some things under his signature that aren't his. Now, the other day I did a video talking about the Sharpie situation, how Donald Trump was sitting in the Oval Office at I think it was an executive order signing. Maybe it was a press conference on something else. I don't remember exactly, but he goes on this tangent about Sharpies, about how there were $1,000 pens that just didn't work. They had like no ink in them. And what he was talking about was the ceremonial pens that a lot of presidents have used for decades, where they would sign part of their signature with multiple pens and then give out those pens as souvenirs. And it was all a thing where, and they wouldn't do it for every piece of legislation, but they would do it for some, specifically ones that they wanted to be remembered for, things that would be considered groundbreaking legislation. A good example would be like the Affordable Care Act, right? That they would turn around, they would sign it with multiple pens, and then as people pushed to get it through, they would turn around and give everybody there, or certain people there anyway, pens. Well, Donald Trump says, well, we had these pens and they were thousands of dollars and they barely wrote, there was no ink in them. Well, then I couldn't stand it. So, and I couldn't just have something with a big S on it and a big, from Sharpie. So I contacted them and they made a special collection for us. And he goes on, and it was like a 5 or a 10-minute thing about Sharpies and these pens that he got from Sharpie to sign his signature. But Sharpie's not coming out saying that conversation never took place. Now, we started talking about Donald Trump and his dementia, and filling in the gaps of your memory when you can't remember something and making something up that fits the narrative is part of dementia. And then when you add a narcissist like Donald Trump, who has to be the most important person in the room, he's got to be the expert on everything. He's got to know more than everybody else. Him saying, well, Sharpie said they wanted to make a special pen just for me. It fits everything, right? So it's just a sign of where Donald Trump is at. He is getting worse by the minute. Now, uh, we're still under a government shutdown. End of last week, the Senate tried to pass a DHS funding bill. And this would fund everything with fresh funding except for TSA, or not TSA, I'm sorry. I got that wrong. It would fund everything with fresh funding except for Border Patrol and ICE. And that died in the House. Mike Johnson is not taking it up. The House of Representatives is not taking it up. They're not dealing with it. So that deal is dead in the House. The House isn't going to take it up. Now, the Senate, I believe, is already out for their 2-week recess. But what was in the deal? Well, basically, it funded everything at current levels, no increases to the rest of the funding for the TSA. The only departments that were not going to be getting any money was going to be ICE and Border Patrol because they were already funded through the One Big Beautiful Bill. Now, the whole thing here is because Democrats are pushing for simple reforms, and we've talked about it a lot. I'm going to bring it up again here, that they're pushing for simple reforms to immigration. ICE should wear body cameras. Doesn't sound too difficult to me. ICE should have to use judicial warrants. Go to a judge and say, hey, we have reason to believe we need to go detain this person, and then go after that person specifically for enforcement. They shouldn't be able to just get an administrator to sign off on their plan and go against anybody. They don't want the Democrats are saying no more to the roving immigration raids, where they're just marching kind of like a paramilitary, because a lot of these guys are paramilitary. They are the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, Patriot Front, those kind of groups. Notice how you don't hear about them anymore? And we really didn't hear a lot about them. They were kind of a thing toward the end of Biden's term. We heard a little bit about them during Biden's administration, but we hadn't heard a lot about them since January 6th because a lot of them had gotten arrested, charged with crimes, and sent to prison. And then Donald Trump turns around and releases them. Okay, so we had all of that happen. And now you have these groups are part of ICE. So they don't want them to be roaming the streets as a paramilitary. They don't want them to be turning around and doing half of the things that they are currently doing. They don't want them just to roam into random businesses, show up with no reason to be there other than, well, there might be somebody here. They want to prevent them from going into what used to be protected areas. Prior to this administration, there were protections for going into and going after places like churches, schools, hospitals, daycare centers. And Democrats want those protections again. The whole thing is about having ICE, act like a law enforcement organization, and not acting like a group of people on a power trip like they currently are. Now, like I said, the House is not going to take this up. Mike Johnson wants no part of it. So what are they looking at doing? Well, GOP senators are looking for an off-ramp, and they are trying to use the reconciliation process without using the anything that would get the Democrats on board. They want to use reconciliation. They can bypass the filibuster to get funding for Border Patrol and ICE for 4 years, 3 years, I guess, whatever's left in Donald Trump's term. They are talking about trying to find a way to go around the Democrats and fund Border Patrol, ICE, and all of DHS from the Democrats being able to do anything about it. Senator John Hoeven, senior member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, said, we are working on reconciliation. We're coming back with reconciliation. We're going to send the House that actually funds DHS for the next 3 years. We're not going through this again with the Dems, okay? And one of the things they're worried about is that Democrats will use Homeland Security funding as leverage to extract concessions from the Trump administration, and that there's going to be more funding shutdowns and showdowns and things like that during the second half of the Trump administration if the Democrats take the House in the 2026 midterms. Now, we've talked a lot about the midterms. Right now, the current makeup of the House of Representatives is 418 either Republicans or Republicans with and independents that lean Republican, that side with them. 214 Democrats, 3 open seats. Now, I'm going to look it up here real quick while I'm talking about the rest of it. But coming up in just over a week, April 7th, there is a special or a runoff election for Georgia District 14. That was Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat. And the whole point was they are looking at filling Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat because she decided to resign. She retired earlier. Okay. She retired way ahead, just after, of course, the 5-year mark. So she got her full retirement. But she retired, and now her seat's up for grabs. It is a runoff between Clayton Fuller, whose main platform is "I got the Trump endorsement," and I think it's Sean Harris, who is actually putting up some good numbers, and I believe has actually been endorsed by Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I'm going to look that up in a second. So we got that runoff coming. GG. So the whole point, there's going to be a runoff election, and I believe it is on the 7th. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has been out, a very prominent conservative, and she has been pushing for the Democrat to win. So that would be 215. And then there's New Jersey special election seat to fill Mickey Sherrill's seat. I just try to figure out when that is going to be held. So this doesn't say. But that one's coming up, and there's a seat in California. And that one could potentially flip, but California has also been redistricted in response to the redistricting efforts in Texas. Okay. So the idea being that Texas and California would be equal, basically. We'd gain a few more Democrats, we'd lose a few out of Texas, and the numbers would stay the same. And that special election for Mickey Sherrill's seat is going to be on April 16th. So little over two and a half weeks from now. And the whole point where I'm going with this is there's only a 3-seat margin, 4-seat margin right now in the House of Representatives. The Democrats could have it down to potentially a 1 or 2-seat majority by the midterms. And that's barring anybody else passing away, anybody else resigning, retiring, etc. Democrats could end up with the majority. Now, if there are vacancies in the House, none of the House seats, as far as I know, are actually going to be or are able to be just appointment seats, right? So if there's an opening, there would have to be a special election. However, sometimes if it's after a certain date, there is no special election and that seat sits vacant. So the Democrats could end up with the majority in the House ahead of the midterms, but I think the majority is going to be the Democrats after the midterms. Like they only would have, if they hold all of the seats they win, they would right now only need to flip 4, and I think 4 seats is easily doable in the House of Representatives. And if they make gains, and you got to consider the fact, when I say them holding all of their seats seems doable, up to this point, there have been numerous special elections around the country ever since Donald Trump became president. and the Republicans have not flipped a single seat in their favor. They have held seats, they've maintained, they have not flipped. And the whole point is where I'm going with this is that they wanted, they are worried that they're going to lose the House, right? And I think it's a foregone conclusion they will. They may lose the Senate. So what Senate Democrat or Senate Republicans are trying to do is to fund DHS and ICE through the end of Donald Trump's presidency, to make sure that it doesn't lead to problems later down the road. Now, I don't know. They've already been going for at least 40 days. I'm just reading here. If it doesn't say anything about well, the only thing I'm seeing here is that House conservatives are pressuring Mike Johnson to instead pass a 60-day stopgap and to fund the entire DHS department for 60 days. So we don't even know if they do pass it, if it would get through the House of Representatives. But that's how desperate they are, right? They are looking at trying to figure out how they can fund DHS and ICE to keep these things going during the second half of his term, because they're pretty much aware that Donald Trump will not have a favorable Congress after the midterms. And I think part of that has to do with if you look at the number of people resigning, they see the writing on the wall. They know his time is short. It's not going to get better for Donald Trump. It's only going to continue to get worse. And while all of it's going on, they have to figure out, how to do what they can do. And they're trying to find ways around it. Now, I was speaking about TSA. Donald Trump signed an executive order late last week saying TSA would be paid today. And we are hearing that TSA did actually get paid. Now, what about the rest of DHS, FEMA workers, and things like that? Do they get paid? No. This was only for TSA because Donald Trump was tired of the negative publicity about the long lines at airports. Some airports are just skipping TSA altogether because they have no one there to actually work it. So he signed this executive order. Now, what he did is somebody gave him this idea. This was not his idea, and it's not necessarily a good idea, but he was playing chicken with the Democrats. Okay. How was he playing chicken? Well, it's much like we talked about before when it came to paying the military during one of the last shutdowns, when he just directed the Department of Defense to pay the military. The power of the purse does not sit with the president. It sits with Congress. So he would need Congress to authorize the money. What he did was basically say, well, this other department within DHS has money, take funds from there, and when you guys get your funding, put the money back. He was doing what a lot of people do. He was kiting the bills. He was, and I'm sure you've seen this trope on sitcoms before. I remember it specifically from an episode of Roseanne. Even though I'm not a huge Roseanne fan anymore after she came out as MAGA and went completely nuts. But there was an episode of classic Roseanne where I remember they were sitting around the table talking about paying the bills and trying to keep the power and the lights and the water and everything on and doing all that. And she's like, well, we can buy ourselves a few days. We'll send the water check to the light company. We'll send the light check to the water company. That'll buy us about a week, and then we can figure things out because they'll have a check, and we can just say, well, we put the wrong check in the wrong envelope, and then it'll buy us a little bit of time. Or that, well, we'll put the check in the mail, and then they'll get the check, and then you know it'll take a week or two for it to clear through the bank and everything, and we have a little bit of time to figure it out. I knew people, and this is part of why businesses don't take checks anymore. Um, I was actually at a local restaurant recently, and somebody's like, "Well, you guys don't take checks?" And it was a little old lady, and I overheard her, and they looked at her, they're like, "We haven't taken checks in like 10 to 15 years." And the reason they don't take checks is because of people like ones I know personally, and I'm sure we all know people like this. What they would do is they would know, well, if I write the check on Wednesday, they won't even try to send it through the company bank for that company till Thursday, and it won't hit my bank till Friday, minimum. So, you have, uh, you got a 2-day window, and you get paid on Friday. So you write the check early, thinking, well, I'm going to get paid. It'll be fine. What happens when your paycheck doesn't come in? What happens when, and I know people where this happened to, they had something unexpected, an old bill. Um, they got sued over something, and they said, well, I'll deal with it later. Never paid on it. They get garnished or back child support. I know several people who, they knew that when they started a new job, at some point, child support recovery was going to be there and picking up child support. And they just didn't know what paycheck it was going to come on. And then suddenly, paycheck hits and there's no money, right? Because they took out whatever. And now you have a check that bounces. Well, that's why places don't take checks. So, anyway, that's what they're doing here with funding for TSA. Donald Trump has found a way to get them paid at least a regular paycheck and some of their back pay. Now, is he going to be able to keep it up? Probably not. Okay. The places he's drawing money from is finite, probably from either Border Patrol or ICE, who were funded in the one big beautiful bill and still have some funding left over. But that funding's only going to go so far. So they're going to have to do something to end up figuring out what to do there and how they're going to fund this. And it doesn't sound like they're any closer to any sort of a funding arrangement. But see, Donald Trump comes out, he gets TSA paid temporarily. He looks like the hero to the problem he himself is causing. They've had several deals, and he has rejected all of them because, again, he is pushing for the SAVE Act. SAVE Act is never going to pass, and they cannot tell him this. They've tried. He will not accept that his own party will not do everything to pass the SAVE Act. And the whole reason, and we've talked a lot about the SAVE Act, that they want to push the SAVE Act through is because they know it will limit who can vote, even though it's going to affect red states worse than blue states. They think it's going to screw up with the election, and they want to end up finding a way to get everything so that they can win, right? That they don't want to lose. So they're trying to limit who can turn out. And as our No Kings protest over the weekend showed, there's at least 9 million people in this country willing to give up a Saturday to go out and protest all of the things that are going on in this administration. At least 9 million. And that doesn't count how many people couldn't go because of health conditions or work or whatever reason. Like, there are a lot of people in this country that are not pleased with what this administration is doing, not even a little bit. So they're looking at what they can do to limit who can turn out. They want to pass the SAVE Act, but it's dead. It's not going to happen. Donald Trump keeps trying to pressure Senate Republicans to kill the filibuster to pass his SAVE Act. They're not going to do that because Senate Republicans see a world where Donald Trump is not president. They understand, and Donald Trump doesn't, that at some point Donald Trump is going to be gone. We were talking about that earlier. And when he's gone, there's a chance that there could be a Democratic controlled Senate. I mean, I think it's possible that they could have the Senate as early as 2027, right after the midterms. That's the Senate's in play this year. And as we're looking at it, Donald Trump doesn't realize it, but the Senate Republicans do. And they want to keep the filibuster around so they can be a pain in the ass to Senate Democrats. So they can block a bunch of stuff from happening, which is why we need to do everything we can to not just give the Democrats the Senate this term. We need to give them as many seats as we possibly can, and then fight to get them as many more in 2028 as we can, because by doing that, it gives them a chance to counteract the filibuster. And it's an outside chance. Now let me look this up here. I want to be correct. I got to figure out which, because every 2 years there are elections for a third of Congress. Okay. Now, that's 2024. Actually, hell, let's just go back to in 2022. There were 14 Democrats and 20 Republicans for the election. And okay, so we had we had 13 Democrats basically what we had in 2022, now that I looked it up, is there were 13 Democrats and 20 Republicans running for election, and there was one flip. Okay. If we fight like hell and we get them as many seats as we can and flip as many seats in 2026, give them the House or give them the Senate by at least one. They would need to have 51. That would be a pickup of 4. But if we get as many as we can, if we get to 54, we get them to 56. And I know that's going to be a hard push, right? But if it happens and we flip even more in 28, we could get them past that 60 vote threshold. So they at least could, then the filibuster doesn't matter, right? However, and I don't see this happening either. It would be a really hard push. But if there are, if we somehow flip enough seats in both elections combined and we get to that 67 number, then impeachment's on the table. We can start removing Supreme Court justices. We can remove any federal judges like Aileen Cannon. And with a Democratic president after the 28th general, we wouldn't have to worry about impeaching anybody in the cabinet because all of the cabinet positions that Trump appointed would be gone. But if we fight like hell now, getting to 67 is impossible in the midterms this year. They're not going to get to 67 senators. It's just not going to happen. However, getting there in 28 while being an outside chance is possible. And the more we fight to give them more seats, the closer that possibility comes. And if they keep doing things that help people, they could end up growing their majorities. All right. Last story I want to talk about real quick is House Secretary Caroline Leavitt said on Monday said the decision to allow a Russian tanker to meet Cuba despite a blockade does not change U.S. policy. She said this is not a policy change. There has not been a formal sanction policy. As the president said last night, we allowed this ship to reach Cuba to provide humanitarian needs. They are being made on a case-by-case basis. Cuba's non-functioning economy cannot be fixed unless they undergo dramatic political and leadership change, but there's been no formal change. Now, Donald Trump had put a blockade around Cuba. It is trying to force a regime change. They went really extreme. He has said that he wants to take Cuba and that he may have the right to take Cuba. Why he wants to do it, I don't know. I think in part it's his dementia-ridden brain. He's going back to what he remembers from the 60s with Kennedy through to what was it, the late 90s, early 2000s, when Fidel Castro had relinquished power to his brother Raul, and then at some point Raul relinquished power again. I don't know if Raul died. I never heard that one, but he's trying to refight that Cold War. But she continued. She said the U.S. still reserves the right to seize vessels if it is legally applicable that are headed towards Cuba and that violate sanction policy. But of course, the president and the administration also reserve the right to waive those seizures on a case-by-case basis. President Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One on Sunday, "It wouldn't bother me if Cuba received oil. If a country wants to send some oil into Cuba, I have no problem with that, whether it's Russia or not." However, Trump said that allowing Russia to send oil to Cuba doesn't help Russian President Putin. He loses one boatload of oil. That's all it is. If he wants to do that, if other countries want to do that, it doesn't bother me much. It's not going to have an impact. Cuba's finished. They have a bad regime and they have a very bad and corrupt leadership. And whether or not they get a boat of oil is not going to matter. But it does help Putin. Allowing Russia to sell oil helps the economy because, as this is where MAGA gets things wrong, the government owns the means of production in Russia. So that means the money from the sale of the oil goes to Russia. So what does that mean? That means if they sell a boatload of oil, Russia's going to get the proceeds, and that money can be then spent in Ukraine. It could be spent helping Iran. It could be spent doing whatever. And the whole point of our sanctions against Russia is to prevent them from expanding their war in Ukraine and trying to we were trying at one point to force them to change their own regime. That was part of the sanctions because of all of the things that Vladimir Putin has done. But see, Donald Trump is buddies with Putin because he's envious of Vladimir Putin and he wants to have the same kind of leadership where what he says goes regardless of whether or not there it is good for the people, whether or not it's actually sound. And Donald Trump doesn't care about whether or not the Constitution should allow him to do anything. Now, this week, we are awaiting oral arguments on Donald Trump's birthright citizenship case. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that on tomorrow's podcast. I may try to get a live in here sometime this week as well. I know you guys like those. Those actually perform better than any of my other podcasts. I'm also going to try to catch up Spotify, probably starting with this podcast. And then hopefully I can get Spotify to the point where I am consistently up over there at least once a day. I'm just going to have to take the time to upload everything. Just a reminder that I do offer the audio versions of all of this on Spotify as well. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. If you guys have any questions, you can always email me at analyticaliowan@gmail.com. You can also send me an email if you want to be a guest on the show. As I said, my schedule should hopefully be freeing up a little bit, and maybe we can get together and find a time, and I'll do it just like Mike does, where we do a Zoom call and we have a conversation, talk news, talk politics, and go from there and figure out, because everybody has a different perspective, and maybe you know something I don't, maybe you see something I don't. Um, and I was on a live with somebody else the other night. I don't remember. I'm gonna try to rack my brain and see if I can remember where they were talking about. But there was also a place you could go to actually request appearances by political candidates. So maybe I might try to get, um, you know, see if I can bring on a political candidate. That would be awesome as well. Would love to talk to who I think is going to be the next governor of Iowa. That would be Rob Sand. But beyond that, just there's a lot of Democrats I would love to have the opportunity to sit down and do a podcast with. But beyond that, you don't have to be a political person to be on the show. Um, as far as being an actual politician, if you just have an opinion and you want to sit down and talk it out for a little bit, maybe you just want to pick my brain about what I think about certain things, shoot me an email, analyticaliowan@gmail.com. We'll set something up, and go from there. All right, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will be back tomorrow with another podcast.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.